that this administration is not getting ahead of the FDA, and we are not planning for facts that aren't yet in evidence. So the numbers and the dates that we've talked about here are relative to what are the two vaccines and the 2-dose regimens that are on the market. Obviously, there would be some improvement should there be a third dose. I will tell you that the expectation, however, should not be that that is an immediate dramatic shift. The expectation should be that their commitment, the schedule, if it were to be approved under EUA, would be about 100 million doses by the end of the second quarter. That's the end of June. And, I would not, at this point, be overly confident that those doses would come evenly. I would expect that they would come towards the end of that contract. So just to set expectations. Dr. Fauci, do you want to add anything and take the other part of the question?
Yes, sure. You explained it well, Andy. Let me take the other part of the question. I mean, certainly when the J&J data were rolled out, that I actually made a comment at the conference at the NIH, the press conference, that this would likely be a messaging challenge when people just think superficially of a number, 72% versus 94 to 95%. But the thing that's important that you need to put into the equation is what you really want to do. You want to prevent people from getting seriously ill. You want to prevent them from getting into the hospital, and you want to prevent them from dying. And if you look at the data, and again, the data is going to be looked at in a more granular way by the FDA, and we'll be hearing more about that the J&J, with its 72% overall efficacy in the USA, actually had a very good record with regard to severe disease, to the point of virtually, when you were looking at South Africa, which was an important part of that trial, there were virtually no hospitalizations or deaths in the individuals, even though the number was lower when it comes to any kind of disease. So there will be situations where people will say to themselves, do I want to get a single dose vaccine and know that I'm protected against serious disease? Or do I want to go with a number that's a 94 to 95? And I can tell you that there are many people who would rather have the convenience of a single dose disease. And there may be areas of the country and or different age groups, depending upon the data, as we'll wait until we get it from the FDA, that might make that more attractive. So I don't think we should be put aback by the fact that there was a difference in the initial number of any kind of efficacy, because there's a lot more to protection than just preventing from getting infected. We want to keep people out of the hospital, and we don't want people to die. And in that regard, this will be value added not only in the United States, but certainly in the developing world. I just got off the phone this morning with some colleagues from South Africa, and you cannot imagine how excited they are about the idea of getting a minimal cold chain required, cheap, one-shot vaccine. Means an awful lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Fauci.
Maybe I will just add that after the FDA meets, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices of the CDC will also be meeting, and will be giving advice on how best to utilize the vaccine once we see the primary data.
What is the demographic breakdown of who is getting the vaccine based on the data that you have? And what is the federal government doing to improve the reporting of that data? And relatedly, what is your recommendation to states based on that data to improve racial equity and how the vaccine is distributed? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Nunez-Smith?
Thank you so much for the question. So, the data that I showed is that we really, don't have as much information as we need in terms of race, ethnicity data. I know the CDC will be releasing more specifics on that, shortly and soon. We have to just double down on our commitment in terms of following and leading really this equitable response. I think it's very encouraging. I shared that at the beginning of the pandemic in terms of race, ethnicity data on hospitalizations, as well as mortality, the data were insufficient and incomplete, and we've made great progress there. So I think there's reason for optimism. We're continuing to meet with states and locals to talk with them about their equity plans, provide technical assistance along the way. So that's certainly going to continue to be part of the work that we do as we seek to get better data for our equity priorities.
Yeah, so we are, of course, a lot of burden falling on states, public health departments, people giving vaccines. We recognize that, we want to support them, but we do have to ask them to really make an extended effort now to report race and ethnicity data as they submit their vaccinations. It is extremely important. There are many people in this country that will find their way to a vaccine no matter how difficult it is. There are many other people in this country who are at greater risk of hospitalization and death, as Dr. Nunez-Smith pointed out, who we need to assist in getting the vaccines to. We can't do that, as Dr. Nunez-Smith so eloquently put it, until we have the information at our fingertips. So that's a call out we're asking for.
So I have a few questions about this new test that is being pushed out at $30 a pop. That sounds cheap compared to the tests that are available now, but it's also a lot of money if you're thinking, I don't know, am I going to test my kindergartner every day, once a week? So how do you really see this working? Who would be paying for these tests? How does a $30 test fit with your equity goals? And are there even going to be enough of them for it to be used for screening?
Thanks, Tamara. So look, the purpose of today's announcement, which is very exciting, is to move to mass production and scale. And obviously, the unit costs will come down only when we can get to that mass production and scale. So there's a chicken and egg problem that I think we have taken a step to solve today by creating mass production so that we will have tens of millions of these tests out there. Secondly, we know there are efforts to create even lower cost and more innovative approaches, and we welcome those. The RADx program and many of the other programs to drive innovation has unleashed, in many respects, a side of America that we haven't talked a lot about during the response to this virus, which is the entrepreneurs and the innovators and the inventors. And so I couldn't agree more that things that are not low cost and accessible don't do us all the good we need. Third point you make is a good question, which we don't have a complete answer for today, which is a question about policy. What will the federal government, state governments, local governments, school districts, what steps will they take to make these tests more available and more affordable? And I think that is an important equation for everyone at the state, federal, and local level to factor into their thinking and their planning, because you're absolutely right that life doesn't change until we create more ubiquitous capability, not only around what we've talked about here, vaccines, but also testing, and also many of the therapies. So that's the work ahead of us. I think with that, I want to thank everybody for joining this briefing. We will be back on Wednesday to do the next COVID-19 response briefing.